Hi everybody, welcome to McNulty's Book Corral. Today we are in Monmouth, Illinois, and I'm standing on the porch of Wyatt Earp's birthplace, and we're going to take a look around. The house is not open for visitation. Earp was born here in 1848. The owners are private owners, and they're currently in an assisted living facility, and the township is hoping to acquire the property. If that happens, possibly the museum will open again. But since we're here, we're going to take a look around. We'll get some pictures and take a look at the area where Wyatt Earp was born and raised. Sadly, Wyatt Earp's birthplace is in a state of disrepair. In fact, there are sections of the building in the rear that are showing destruction by animals. So I don't know if the raccoons have gotten in the house or the squirrels, but certainly they have some serious problems. Obviously, I don't know what the interior looks like because I haven't been inside, but I understand it's been looked after just modestly by someone, perhaps friends of the owners. There is a humidifier inside that I could see through the window. But all the same, something needs to be done if the house is going to be preserved. There is a lot of work that needs to be done. It's not critical yet, but it could become critical, especially with the two prominent holes. I saw one hole high up near the gutter where animals could get in, and one down low, which would take them into the basement. So some serious issues here with the house in Monmouth, Illinois. Blue-collar neighborhood. A lot of houses in the area are run down, which is a little sad to see in this day and age, but that's what you have in these small towns where the economy is really strapped. You called down the thunder? Well, now you got it. Welcome, my friends, back to McNulty's Book Corral. I hope you enjoyed that little jaunt we took out there to Monmouth, Illinois, to visit the birthplace of Wyatt Earp. Interesting little town, farm community, obviously, especially when the Earp family lived there all those many years ago. Today we're going to talk about the Wyatt Earp Bibliography. What are the best books about Wyatt Earp? And we're going to start with the book that I consider the very best, which is a recent vintage. John Bosanecker's Ride the Devil's Herd, Wyatt Earp's epic battle against the West's biggest outlaw gang. I reviewed this on my blog. You can go read that review. I'm just going to repeat a few things here. This is the very best account I have ever read, and I've read a lot, on the gunfight at the OK Corral and the events that caused that to happen. The circumstances, the cast of characters, the many people involved, and so forth. When I read this book, I was really happily stunned to read a book by someone who understood the circumstances. The Earps and Doc Holliday and Tombstone had no choice. And this is an author and a researcher who understands the elements, and he puts it together with this amazing cast of characters so that you can understand how really dangerous that area was. At that time, the Earps were there in Tombstone, and they really had no choice. They were fully within their rights to act as they did in Tombstone on that fateful day when the gunfight at the OK Corral took place. Now, that doesn't mean that Wyatt Earp was a saint. He wasn't. He had his flaws like anybody. But when it comes to that event in Tombstone, this is the best account. It's not just about Wyatt Earp. It's about everything that happened, all of the people, the cast. What a great piece of research this is. This is my favorite book on Wyatt Earp, okay? And that's why I reviewed it on my blog, and I'm putting this first. If you need to read a book about Wyatt Earp, a nonfiction account, this is where you begin. Now, there's some others. We're going to go through a whole list of really interesting books. Let me just set that down. The next one has been in print for quite a number of years, and this is also a highly regarded book. Casey Teffertiller's Wyatt Earp, The Life Behind the Legend. This book is probably the one that most people regard as the definitive overall biography of Wyatt Earp, and I would have to agree with that as well. Put this next to Mr. Bosanecker's book, and you have the best nonfiction account of this man's life. and you'll understand him a lot better from reading these two books. So, just to bring that into perspective, this is what counts when it comes to reading nonfiction about Wyatt Earp. These two stunningly wonderful, beautifully researched, excellently written books, okay? I'm quite fond of them. This one is my favorite. Obviously, Mr. Bosa. I have many of Mr. Bosenecker's books, by the way, in my library. He is just a great researcher and writer. Another book that I like, Inventing Wyatt Earp, His Life and Many Legends by Alan Barra. This goes back a very long way as well. It's pretty good. You know, I'd rate this as the third. I think it's an excellent overall view. I don't quite agree with his attitude here and there in relation to Earp's and their motivations at the OK Corral, but in general, I think that he generally gets it, and it's pretty good stuff. Interesting to compare that with the other two, all right, if you're looking at that. Now, this book a friend brought over in the past year is called Murder in Tombstone. That should give you a clue as to how misguided this author would be. The Forgotten Trial of Wyatt Earp by Stephen Lubet, or Lubet, L-U-B-E-T. I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think it's pronounced Lubet. However you pronounce his name. This is probably the worst book on Wyatt Earp that is out there. The title gives away his opinion on Wyatt Earp. And again, this is an author that failed to understand the complexities of the group that were known as the Cowboys, and that's what they were known as. And how the Earps were really had no choice. They were really forced into that deadly confrontation and acted within reason at the gunfight at the OK Corral. This author does not understand that. He does go far in talking about the trial, because they stood trial for that. Those trial transcripts, by the way, still exist. All of these books discuss that. You can read that for yourself. I just didn't like the attitude that this author presents. It's too easy to say Earp was a murderer. Maybe he was after that, if he went on his so-called vendetta ride. But on that day, when he had that gunfight at the so-called OK Corral, he was not a murderer. Okay, so that's just my opinion on reading some really well-written books. Wyatt Earp Speaks, which was edited by John Richard Stevens. This has been on the market for a long time. I believe there's multiple editions of this. There's a new edition out there. This compiles different sources, including the trial transcript and things that were written about Earp, comments from the people that knew him and so forth. General overview on Earp, first-hand accounts recommended. If you get it, Wyatt Earp Speaks. I think you can easily find that on Amazon with a different cover. Now let's go back in time to... No, let's not go back in time just yet. Let's go to The Last Gunfight by Jeff Gwynne. And this is a book that... I think it's okay. It's subtitled The Real Story of the Shootout at the OK Corral and How It Changed the American West. I think that's okay, you know, as a subtitle. I think that it's, in general, pretty good. You know, I'm not going to quibble over attitudes, this and there, and here and there, in any of these books. You know, every author has their own attitude toward Earp, and their attitude toward Earp will be evident in the book that you read. So Jeff Gwynne is no exception to that. I think he did a reasonable job with this. I do recommend it. Again, those first two books that I recommended are the ones you start with. Everything else you compare to them. Those first two books by Bosenecker and Teffertiller are the gold standard in biographies on Wyatt Earp. Okay, you start there. Everything else falls into place beneath that, in my humble, crazy opinion. All right, so just there you go. All right, now we're going to take a look at two historically important books. Stewart Lake obviously wrote the first biography on Earp, talking to him, and it was published, I think, in 1929. Oddly enough, I don't own any copy of it except the Whitman abridged copy, which was released in the 1950s to coincide with the Hugh O'Brien TV show. That's the only copy of the Stewart Lake book I have. Most people don't regard the Stewart Lake biography as anything other than myth-making. I did read the original text years ago. I don't own a copy of it for whatever reason. I don't know. I just guess it was silly. But if you're reading Wyatt Earp and looking to understand Wyatt Earp, you need to look at all of these books. So I own that. And this is Walter Noble Burns, Tombstone. Gunfighting, or gun-toting, cattle-rustling days in old Arizona. This is a first edition, I think. It might be a reprint. No, this is a first edition. I had to put Mylar on it. This is the book that brought Wyatt Earp to the attention of the public in the 1920s. Not long before he died. Maybe it was shortly after he died. And he talks about, there's a whole section in here devoted to Wyatt Earp. And this is really the book credited with starting the ball rolling in the public's interest in the historical facts regarding Wyatt Earp. So it is historically important. It is not historically accurate. But it's an interesting book to read if you're willing to read it with a grain of salt involved there, if you catch my drift. Tombstone by Walter Noble Burns, late 20s, 1920s. So that is there. Finally, since we're on the topic of Wyatt Earp, we're going to go from fact to fiction. This is The Masked Rider, Tales of the Wild West, Volume 3, which was published by Airship 27 this past year. And these are works of fiction. Included in this, if I may be so bold as to mention it, is a story I wrote called Kings of the Sage. My story is the first one presented in the anthology, and it is a fictional account of Wyatt Earp. This is myth-making intentionally, so I think it's a fun, exciting story. I hope you'll give this book. The other stories involve a character, the Masked Rider, who is a pulp character. My story is the standalone Wyatt Earp, Untold Tale of Wyatt Earp. Kings of the Sage can be found here in The Masked Rider, Volume 3. I hope you look it up. And let me know in the comments if you liked my story about Wyatt Earp. This is not historically accurate. I made this up, okay? That means I strapped on the gun belt, I put the hat on, I had a pint in the saloon, I shook the trail dust out of my throat, and I thought, oh yeah, and I wrote a story about Wyatt Earp. Kings of the Sage, about Wyatt Earp and Doc Holliday, an untold tale you have never heard before. I do hope that you find it exciting and that you'll give it a chance and support this volume from Airship 27, which includes my story, Kings of the Sage, and that is the end of my long-winded plug. I do hope that you enjoyed this episode relating to the legendary Wyatt Earp, certainly one of the most fascinating characters in American Western history. I wish you all well. Stay well. Stay happy. Feed your brain. Read a book. Go have yourself some sarsaparilla. Shake the trail dust out of your throat.